was just thinking, growing up in Michigan and the tragedy that happened at Michigan State. And so I grew up a Michigan fan, but I did a lot of ministry at MSU Student Parish. So my best friend was the chaplain there for years. And so love Michigan, but I don't really hate Michigan State. Come to know a couple of their coaches really well, right? And you're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to have these strong rivalries. But of course, we've seen one of our parishioners, right, pitches for Michigan State. And, that pregame, Michigan play Michigan State, they come together in the field, they kneel and pray, and you see what's really important. And I saw in the basketball game last night, which Michigan won, which is nice, but I saw someone hold up a sign, if you know this whole tension around little brother, and someone had little brother in a sign but had crossed out little, and it said, love you, brother. And the Michigan band played their alma mater, and they turned the lights to green, All these things play against the rivalries, and we certainly have them in our own communities. And yet we know what's really important. And I was just reflecting last night. I missed the start of that game. I'm not a huge basketball fan, actually, so I just kind of flipped into it accidentally. So they were showing that very late in the game with the band. And I just found myself going, why does it take tragedy to do that? Why can't we, in moments of great joy, do that? Sometimes we do, but not nearly as much. Why does it take tragedy? I don't have an answer to that. It just struck me that why couldn't we, after victory, say, love you, brother, instead of little brother? Instead, we'll dig it in. I just don't understand. Some people say it's for fun and all that, but I've seen it be not so fun, right? It often ends with a lot of hurt feelings. Sometimes running an all-boys school, particularly after school, maybe they're having fun and they're pushing and shoving and they're shadowboxing. And that often doesn't end in shadowboxing, right? All it takes is one person to actually connect one, and now we have a different event. And it started as a joke. This wasn't actually what I was going to preach to you on, but now I got to go here, okay? And I got to keep this short because, at least under 20 minutes, because we've already got a lot going on. The word was be perfect. But perfect here has nothing to do with no fault or no error. I don't know if you ever thought about, what does that mean? Be perfect like God's perfect. But I'm not. I'm keenly aware of all the ways in which I'm not. But that word in Greek, teleios, doesn't mean that at all. It means maturity, complete, consummated, and sort of these things in love. Consummated, by the way, of course, has a marital connotation, but it's literally what Jesus says from the cross just before he dies. Consummatum est. It is fulfilled. It is done, or what we often translate into English, it is finished. But it's really about maturity. Be perfect. Can we be mature? And all those things, some of them are quite silly. As I said, it seems to be that tragedy slaps us in the face to get away from the silly and return to what is real. And maybe that is why God chose to die. As I've said over and over again, God could have saved us any way he wanted. Salvation could have come to us any way God wanted, including, I Dream of Jeannie kind of style. Young people, that was a TV show in the 70s. But God chose to come, be born, be vulnerable, be small, risk it all, and then let us kill him. Maybe it's because he knew that's when we have people's attention, is in tragedy. I don't know. But it certainly is about maturity. It certainly is about maturity of faith, to be complete, to be consummated in love. And so we heard it in the first read that God is holy. We hear Paul begging the Corinthians, who at this point had blown into little fractured communities. Why? Over that which was different. And he's just begging them, please don't do this. It never leads to wholeness. It can't. And in our world, we see a lot of versions of this, and it's always rooted in fear, brothers and sisters. If people are talking to you out of fear, be very, very, very suspicious of what they're talking about. It just isn't a gospel value. It isn't that there aren't things to fear. I don't play in the street. I don't touch the hot stove. I get all of that. But when what people are, when they're just messengers of fear, where they're taking us to is not life. They're taking us to defense, and they're taking us to draw out those distinctions. And you'll never love your enemies if that's what you're drinking, if that's what you're fed. And so I would suggest to us all that those are the kinds of things that we're going to have to work on. If we're going to be mature, we're going to have to more and more take the complexities of life and hold them with empathy. Take the complexities of life and hold them with empathy. And there's a lot that's complex in our lives, in our world, in our church. We're going to have to be the kind of people that can take that which our pain and our hurt and our suffering, and if we're not careful, those quickly translate into things of ugliness and bitterness and hatred and intolerance. And when people offer us ugliness and bitterness and hatred and intolerance, we can't return that in kind. That's an eye for an eye. That's tooth for a tooth. It's been tried, and some are convinced that's the way to go. It's always funny to hear Christians say that. Well, eye for an eye. You know the guy we worship corrected that, right? Or he changed it, I should say, or fulfilled it more correctly. It's not that he corrected it, but that he just said. As Gandhi once said, an eye for eye just leaves everyone blind. Is that really what we want? Real quick, by the way, you know what the teaching was before eye for an eye? 7-1. And it's funny, studying in Israel, you would hear this occasionally. If there was like a fight in the square, if someone, I saw this once where a little street urchin went to grab this woman's purse and he cut the strap, but he also cut her arm. And so it created this huge kerfuffle in the square. And the soldiers showed up chanting in Hebrew, 7 for 1, 7 for 1. And they beat the snot out of 7 people, right? So it's so funny to hear Christians go back to an eye for an eye. Jews often go back to 7 for 1. Why? Oh, because it feels better. Feels like something got done. But that's not a gospel value. How perfect that we're baptizing a young one today. What, 4 weeks old, 5 weeks old? 5. And to say, be mature. Right? That we start with this little child and say, there's this journey that we want you to be on, Zachary. That we want to go with you. That we want to take the things that we've learned. We don't have to learn all of our lessons firsthand. Amen? I don't have to touch the stove. I can deduce that, oh, when it's red like that, you don't touch it. Why? Well, because my brother did, and he'd been crying for days. Sometimes adolescents say, but I've got to make some of my own mistakes. You do. You absolutely do. But trust me, as few as possible, right, adults? As few as possible. Learn as many as you can from other people's stupidity. There's no reason. That's the maturity I'm talking about. That we would look around us as a community and say, how are we going to support Zachary to grow to maturity? How will we support each other? Can we hold those complexities? That's more than enough, because what we're about to do is far more important. That we add another to our roles, that we add another to our ranks, that will come up with us, not to fight for the truth, but to live in the light. I love Maya Angelou in all of her life. I still follow her Twitter account. She died several years ago, but her foundation still tweets out stuff. But Thursday was the 1-year anniversary of her son's death. And he was once said, was it tough living in her shadow your whole life? And he said with a smile, I never lived in her shadow. I lived in her light. What a beautiful way to look at it. We don't live in the shadow of God. We live in his light as that sun shines right down here, as it shines right on the baptismal font that we're about to participate in. We don't live in the shadow of anything. We bask in this light. And our world lives in shadow. Our world needs light. Doesn't need a fight. Doesn't need to be preached to or corrected and name called. It needs those that will step into that light and follow that light. And Jesus showed us where that goes for each and every one of us. Enough for me. Let's take a moment. We'll offer our prayers first, and then we will add to our roles, to our ranks, another one who will be a part of that light, whom we will all have a responsibility to make sure he grows and matures, that his faith is complete, that it is consummated. That's a tall order for all of us. Starts with parents and godparents. But we know, as cars are zipping down the road right now, this is hope for all, what we are about to do, just as all of your lives are hope for me and for each other. May God be praised.